learned from having to deal with all this that second impact concussion can be fatal. People just don't realize. I never even heard of that before. It never occurred to me, never thought about it, her getting a second concussion right after the first one. We all need to be educated about it. Jessica was at her school with her cheer team, and they were practicing before a basketball game.
That day there were 5 girls missing, and the coach said, well, would y'all rather do just cheers or do the actual routine and just fill in the stunts? So, of course we all wanted to stunt because stunting's fun. And so I was up on the top, and then the girl next to me was just a little bit lower, and then I had my foot up and she was holding it in the stunt next to me. And then she fell, and then instead of letting go, she pulled my foot. So then I fell, nobody caught me, and I hit head first right here on the gym floor.
I know they got her ice, and they thought she was fine. And I guess about 20 or 30 minutes after the fall, the other cheerleaders on the team came over to get me and told me that she had fallen.
I got home from work late, Jessica was cheerleading, and Colleen, my wife, just said that Jessica fell at cheerleading, and she was fine, so I didn't think anything of it. When they came home, I looked at her, and she seemed fine. She didn't seem dazed and confused and any signs of any severe head injury.
I took her to a pediatrician the next day who told me just to give her Advil and take her back to school, and I did do that. And she spent her whole day leaving classrooms and going to the nurse's office really sick. And I sent her to school the next day, which was Wednesday.
Nothing really started till 2 days later, and then that's when everything kind of kicked in, and I couldn't wake up, I wasn't talking.
On Thursday, she slept in late. I didn't wake her up to go to school, and she couldn't wake up. At 11 o'clock, she was just like lethargic and not responsive, and I ended up just picking her up out of bed, and we went to the emergency room. I just felt like something wasn't right.
They gave the generic paperwork for head injuries. It gave really no limitations of any activity, kind of could go back to school.
I still don't feel like we got the right advice. I don't know, just your instincts. She just didn't seem right still.
So I called a good friend of mine, Jeff Dugas. He's a physician in orthopedics at St. Vincent's. He says, I got just the guy.
Initially, it was really hard for them to get the proper diagnosis. And so what was fortunate for them is that they kept asking and kept inquiring until they got to where they needed to be. And once we began working with them and we understood truly what her needs were, we were able to make sure that she was seeing the proper professionals who had the proper background and training to be able to help her to once again become successful.
He said no TV, no phone, no computer, really no leaving the house, nothing that involves brain activity.
It took us weeks to get that advice. And once we got it, to adhere to it and not give in to temptation to let her have a friend over or that sort of thing. It was hard.
I was really mad, I guess, and upset because I couldn't do anything. And so we wrote down a list and a schedule of things to do. And so, we came up with like audiobooks, coloring, painting. I mean, it was really hard to think stuff to do, but my main thing ended up being coloring.
It hurts to see a kid upset. I mean, my child, we're big Alabama fans, and the Thursday before the national championship, which was that Monday, he said, you can't watch that game on TV. They're going to complain and get upset about it. You just say, well, this is how you're going to make it better. And he explained it to me, explain the injury. It's just like if you pull a muscle in your leg, like a football player has a hamstring injury, you don't run on that leg. You got to rest the muscle till it's better. And if they come back too early, they're going to tear it again, and it's even worse. It's even worse.
The mechanism of injury of a concussion occurs whenever you have what we call an acceleration-deceleration injury. And what happens is that the brain continues to travel inside the skull, and so when you come to a stop, the skull travels until it hits the inside of the skull. And so that's called the coup injury, or the initial impact injury. Then the brain is going to bounce back and hit the opposite side of the brain against the skull again, and that's called a contra-coup injury. Both of those can result in some bruising to the brain. And so it's very important during that time that we rest that brain as much as possible, and while the brain is still in that irritated state, if you will, or very vulnerable state, that we do not expose it to any further injury.
I think people think that as long as you're not knocked unconscious and dizzy and you have your memory, you can resume activities, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. A headache is a symptom of a brain injury until that gets better. you're still injured, and you need to rest that brain, and you need to take care of it.
You cannot determine the severity of a concussion immediately after the injury. And so it may be minutes or even hours after the initial injury before you see the full effects of a concussion. And that's one of the reasons it's really important that people remember this mantra: when in doubt, sit it out. Because you may have just thought that you had a minor ding or bell ringer, and that could turn into a serious concussion.
I think that's the first thing Dr. Akerson said to us is, if you do what I tell you, you're going to get better. I can't tell you when or how long, but it's going to be faster than if you don't. So you see these people, you hear people have headaches for 1 year, 2 years. If they just took the time out and rested for 2 or 3 months, it would just be 2 or 3 months.
Most people assume that a concussion is a headache for just 3 days and you're back to doing your activity, which might be for a lot of people, but for us, she lost almost 5 months of everything that was going on. If we didn't take it seriously and pay attention to her symptoms, if I had sent her back to cheerleading, she could have gotten a second concussion or hit her head again, and it could have affected her cognitively or permanently.
If they experience that second concussion before they fully recovered from the first one, then we're more likely to see long-term negative outcomes, sometimes even serious outcomes. Something that does not happen frequently, but it can happen, is something that's called second impact syndrome. And with second impact syndrome, that ends up being a very devastating neurological injury. So there's one very well-known case, Zachary Lystat, who was a high school football player and continued to play with the symptoms of a concussion.
It was real close to the halftime, and I started kind of almost even walking out on the field. By then, a coach had already made it out to Zach and then was walking him off the field. During halftime, they left and did their little timeout and came back, played the rest of the game every down. And at the end of the game, he wasn't doing very well. He started shaking his head. And the last thing Zach said to me was, "Daddy, I can't see," and then he passed out. So I just was laying on top of my kid and just continued, hoping and praying that he would live. He was critically unstable on the 9th floor of Harborview Trauma One's hospital. There was 9 people in that unit, and 4 of those people died while we were there in 12 days. We just battled. I mean, Zach's strong. I mean, he's extremely strong.
Zachary's come a long ways from the beginning. There has been times that it's been kind of slow and it gets a little frustrating and everything and stuff. And then there are times that you just are overjoyed because he actually was able to feed himself with a spoon or being able to swallow a liquid and not have him aspirate or anything. And then also too, just being able to go from being lifted into the swimming pool to do his water therapy, and now he's walking in and out with a handrail and trying to make every step count.
Ready? Lift. Good, and back.
Walking doesn't come easy for me at all, but it's becoming a lot easier now than it was like 6 months ago. So I gotta be thankful for that.
The worst thing that could ever happen is you make the wrong call, and that is put the kid back in or let him go back or let her go back in. And then what if there's a bleed, and what if they die? And it's a play, it's a game. It might even be a season, but it's not the rest of your life. I mean, our entire life has been changed.
Concussions happen probably every day, but it's what you do after the concussion that really matters. If I were to go back to that game again, I'd pull myself out of the game. I'd definitely take myself out of the game. But on the other hand, I believe everything happens for a reason. And that's why I think I was chosen to deliver this message so that it doesn't happen to anyone else.